fiscal year 2023 budget request for the United States Corps of Engineering and the Bureau of Reclamation. Ranking Member Kennedy and I will each have an opening statement. We will then turn to our witnesses to present testimony on behalf of the Corps and the Bureau. Each witness will be allowed 5 minutes for opening remarks, and of course, if you need more, I've never seen us not do that. At the conclusion of the witnesses' testimony, I'll recognize senators for 5 minutes of questions each. And I'd like to welcome our witnesses, thank them for being here today. They are Mr. Michael Connor, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Lieutenant General Scott Spellman, the Chief of Engineers for the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and Mr. David Palumbo, Deputy Commissioner of Operations for the Bureau of Reclamation at the Department of Interior. I'd like to speak for a moment about the Army Corps' budget request, which cuts more than $1.7 billion from the enacted level for the Civil Works program. That's a 21% cut. I'm particularly disappointed that $1 billion of that is to the construction account. Last year, we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It included $17 billion for the Corps of Engineers. The point of the bill was to address the backlog in infrastructure funding, not replace the regular funding program. The budget request undercuts the value of that investment by dramatically cutting the construction account. So in order to make tangible progress on our infrastructure backlog, we've got to make some real investments this year. And in that regard, I'd really hope that we would have some informal conversations among us on this subcommittee and see what we might be able to do, because I believe we're really going to set back our nation if we can't have up-to-date infrastructure. So we will now begin with our witnesses, unless anyone else has an opening statement. Please, go ahead.
Well, first, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our country. I do have a few remarks that I wanted to make, and bear with me. I've got them written down here. I don't usually like to do it that way, but I wanted to choose my words carefully today. At last year's budget justification hearing, with respect to the Corps and the Bureau of Reclamation, I gave some opening remarks as ranking member of the subcommittee, and I showed you some images. They're behind me today. I wanted to emphasize them again. These are images of what we call HISTRIS, which, as you know, is an acronym for Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. HISTRIS was and is America's and Louisiana's response to Hurricane Katrina, which struck New Orleans in 2000. Well, it struck all of South Louisiana and large parts of Mississippi in 2005. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank the American taxpayer and the American people for HISTRIS. Today, I just wanted to comment briefly on why I think our country can take pride in what I think of as the ingenuity of the United States Army Corps of Engineers working on all of its projects, but especially with Louisiana's Coastal and Restoration Authority, which is very important to my state. Hurricane Katrina, as we all know, was a Cat 5 hurricane. It hit New Orleans August 29th, 2005. Not just New Orleans. It hit all of South Louisiana. It hit all of my friends in Mississippi. It caused unprecedented losses. We had 1,800 fatalities, $125 billion in damage. There was a 28-foot storm surge. 85-foot waves. The surge in waves caused, in my state, 50 major levee breaches of our previous protection system. Compromised 169 of our system's 350 miles of levee protection. 34, we have 71 pumping stations in New Orleans, which, as you know, is below sea level. Without those pumping stations, we would flood with every rain, except for the French Quarter, where our founders knew to build on high land. 34 of the 71 of our pumping stations were damaged. About 80% of the city of New Orleans was flooded to depths as deep as 15 feet in some areas. I die a little bit inside every time I remember the devastation. And I don't want to minimize the devastation in the rest of Louisiana as well, and in Mississippi. Hurricane Katrina left, because the levees broke in New Orleans and it flooded 250 billion gallons of water. It took us 53 days to pump it out. In response to Hurricane Katrina, America sent numerous federal agencies, thank you, America, to help Louisiana recovery and rebuild. I want to focus on the essential role that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers played in that, because we don't talk about it enough. In repairing and rebuilding the levees and the flood walls that encircle the New Orleans metropolitan area, not just New Orleans, the area surrounding as well, because I don't want to minimize the damage to anyone. The Corps incorporated lessons learned and recommendations from international experts. You talk to scientific organizations, you talk to other government agencies, you talk to the private sector, and we all studied the system failure. From this collaborative knowledge base and its work with the Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority in my state, we're trying to do our part. These engineering accomplishments include the Corps strengthening the levees, the flood walls, the gated structures, the pump stations that form the 133-mile greater New Orleans area perimeter system that encircles this part of my state, and you can see some of your good work here. The Corps improved approximately 70 miles of interior risk reduction structures within the levee that encircles the New Orleans metropolitan region. Among the Corps' technically advanced engineering solutions, HISTRIS now includes a surge barrier wall that's 1.8 miles long. It's an engineering marvel. It's the largest design-build civil works project in your history. Maybe the largest in America's history. HISTRIS also includes the largest drainage pump station in the world. HISTRIS works and has already spared lives and property, saved taxpayers millions of dollars in my area from expensive storm recovery. Last year, Hurricane Ida hit us. Category 4 storm. It hit southeast Louisiana. Its surge would have overtopped our levees before your good work. And additionally, there would have been overtopping along the inner harbor navigation canal corridor if the HISTRIS surge barrier had not been in place. This would have flooded, gutted St. Bernard Parish, Orleans Parish. And I want all of us to be mindful of that. I'm almost done, Madam Chair. I'm sorry I talk slow. On May 26th, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be conducting an official ceremony at the surge barrier just outside of New Orleans. I'm going to try to be there. The purpose will be turning over the HISTRIS system to Louisiana authorities we will now operate it with your guidance. And I understand that Corps of Engineers principals will be leading and participating in these ceremonies. We'll have many state and local officials there. We'll have many, many, many grateful Louisianians. And I intend to be present, and I'd like to ask the members of this committee to join me. I want you to all come to New Orleans and see this engineering marvel that the Corps of Engineers constructed, and the American people, who are the most generous people in the history of the world, paid for. So I'll be in touch. If you're interested in coming to Louisiana for May 26th, we would love to have you. This project will take your breath away. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I thank you, Senator. Are there any other comments from the dais? If not, we'll proceed with the witnesses. We'll hear from Assistant Secretary Connor, followed by Lieutenant General Scott Spellman, then Deputy Commissioner Palumbo. So, Mr. Secretary, we're ready for you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chair Feinstein, Ranking Member Kennedy, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's budget request for the Army Civil Works Program. The fiscal year 2023 budget request includes $6.6 billion for the Civil Works Program. It is focused on smart investments that are focused on yielding high economic and environmental returns, increasing resilience to climate change, and decreasing climate risk for communities and aquatic ecosystems based on the best available science, supporting a strong economy by facilitating safe, reliable, and sustainable commercial navigation, and promoting environmental justice and investing in disadvantaged communities that have been too often left behind. Sorry about that. There we go. With this budget, the Army will continue working with community partners to develop, manage, restore, and protect our nation's precious water resources, particularly as it relates to the three main missions of the Army Civil Works Program: commercial navigation, flood protection and storm damage reduction, and aquatic ecosystem restoration. With respect to disadvantaged communities, the administration has set a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments in climate and clean energy investments flow to disadvantaged communities, the Justice 40 initiative. Actions in this area include an examination of the activities of key programs to determine whether benefits have accrued to disadvantaged communities. There are also funds to, 1, improve access to Civil Works technical assistance programs and to develop projects that benefit disadvantaged communities. And 2, ensure any updates to Civil Works policies and guidance will not result in a disproportionate negative impact on disadvantaged communities. The FY23 budget also continues the process of addressing the climate crisis and evaluating the Civil Works programs to identify appropriate actions to support the administration's efforts to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad. The budget includes well over $1 billion to support the Corps of Engineers' climate resiliency efforts and reduce the risk of damages from floods and storms and restore the nation's aquatic ecosystems. These efforts include incorporating natural and nature-based features, infrastructure solutions wherever possible. Investments include $974 million for construction of flood and storm damage reduction and aquatic ecosystem restoration projects, over $90 million to improve the resilience of core infrastructure to climate change, and $37.4 million for technical and planning assistance programs with an emphasis on work to help local communities identify and address their flood risks. The budget also includes funding to continue studies to investigate climate resilience in numerous areas such as the Great Lakes coasts, as well as central and southern Florida. Let me highlight some specific allocations. In support of this administration's commitment to our nation's coastal ports and inland waterways, critical links in the nation's supply chains, the FY 2023 budget includes over $3 billion for the study, construction, and operation and maintenance of inland and coastal navigation projects. These funds will be used in conjunction with the $465 million provided in the bipartisan infrastructure plan for the maintenance and repair of existing navigation harbors, channels, and navigation locks and dams on the nation's ports and waterways. The budget proposes to derive over $1.7 billion from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for eligible projects with an emphasis on O&M, including dredging of completed projects. The budget also contains over $1.5 billion for flood and storm damage reduction, including an increase in funding for technical and planning assistance to local communities. The budget proposes to assist these local efforts with emphasis on non-structural approaches. The budget includes $624 million for aquatic ecosystem restoration, including $407 million for the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Program, in addition to the $1.1 billion allocated to South Florida Ecosystem Restoration in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Spend Plan. Together, these investments will enable significant progress in restoring America's Everglades. Significantly, the budget provides more than $1.2 billion in the construction account. The construction program uses objective, performance-based guidelines to allocate funding toward the highest performing economic, environmental, and public safety investments. The FY 2023 budget provides nearly $2.6 billion in the O&M account. For O&M, the budget emphasizes maintaining and improving the performance of existing projects. The allocation of funding among projects for maintenance reflects a risk-informed approach that considers both project conditions and the potential consequences of a failure. Of note, the FY 2023 budget includes $106 million in the investigations account, which highlights the ongoing need in many communities to develop new projects. Finally, the FY 2023 regulatory program is funded at $210 million to protect the nation's water and wetlands and provide efficiency in permit processing. I'm honored to implement the President's priorities through the Army Civil Works programs. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Chairwoman Feinstein, Ranking Member Kennedy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I am also honored to testify before you today, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the fiscal year 2023 budget of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, another record investment in our Civil Works program. And Senator Kennedy, I should just thank you up front for your very kind words about the Corps. I think we all know that we did not do this alone. There are a lot of talented engineers and scientists in the state of Louisiana helped us deliver that system, and looking forward to 26 May, where we finally cut the ribbon. Today, I look forward to discussing the status of important Corps projects and programs, as well as answering any questions the committee may have regarding the 23 budget. Most importantly, I look forward to continuing to work with this committee, all of Congress, and the administration to address the nation's water resource infrastructure needs. We greatly appreciate the committee's continued support of the Corps' program. With recent supplemental appropriations, including the Hurricane Ida Disaster Relief Supplemental, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and continued record-high annual appropriations, the Corps Civil Works program has experienced significant growth over the past several years. This substantial level of investment enables critical water resource infrastructure to be studied and constructed, and also helps with developing innovating approaches to address some of our most pressing needs through a focused research and development program. The fiscal year 2023 budget reflects a targeted approach to continue investing in our water resources programs to promote climate resiliency, which will benefit the nation's economy, environment, and public safety now and well into the future. The budget also supports the Secretary's priorities for the Corps by upgrading our nation's waterways, protecting communities and ecosystems, better serving disadvantaged communities, investing in science and research and development, and finally, sustaining and improving our communications and our relationships with partners and communities. The 2023 budget, taken with other recent funding, provides the Corps with what the Secretary calls a transformational opportunity to deliver water resource infrastructure projects that will positively impact communities across our great nation. So we are also taking this advantage of this opportunity to transform our organization and our decision-making processes to safely deliver quality projects on time and within budget. We are also taking deliberate steps to proactively identify risks to the execution of our program, then developing measures to reduce, resolve, or eliminate those risks. By evolving our policies, programs, and operations, and placing increased focus on research and development, we are working to overcome impacts of sea level rise, changes to precipitation patterns and hydrology, and other effects of climate change, including improvement to the resilience of our own Corps-operated infrastructure. I will conclude by saying the Corps does not accomplish anything on its own. We draw upon our engineering expertise and build upon our partnerships with our non-federal partners, project stakeholders, and Congress to enable us to succeed. I look forward to continuing our great collaboration as we continue to take on the challenges that face us today and those of tomorrow. And thank you again, Chairwoman Feinstein, Ranking Member Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chair Feinstein, Ranking Member Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to discuss the President's budget for the Bureau of Reclamation. I am David Palumbo, Acting Commissioner. The Bureau of Reclamation is the largest supplier and manager of water in the nation and the second largest producer of hydropower. Reclamation's working relationship with the subcommittee has helped us address both long-standing and emerging challenges in the West. Addressing drought resilience, water security, climate change adaptation, ecosystem health, and issues of equity are essential, as are the continuing needs of secure, maintaining, and modernizing our nation's water infrastructure. We have a generational opportunity to couple our fiscal year 2023 $1.4 billion budget with that of the bipartisan infrastructure law to put money to work on the ground to advance these vital needs for the American people. At the outset, I'd like to acknowledge the significant, expansive, and persistent drought in most Western watersheds. There have been successive and compounding years of drought, exacerbating the dire conditions on the ground. Increasing temperatures increase evapotranspiration, which decreases soil moisture and ultimately decreases runoff, which negatively impacts available renewable freshwater resources. These hydrologic conditions have resulted in the need to make difficult decisions. Many water users, power contractors, tribes, and related communities have had to make significant sacrifices. In the Colorado River Basin, we are in the 23rd year of drought. Last month, we dropped to less than 35 feet above minimum power pool at Glen Canyon Dam, with minimum power pool being the lowest point where we can generate hydropower at this critical facility, which provides carbon-free energy and electrical grid stability and support for other renewables like wind and solar. We have not been at this elevation since Lake Powell was being initially filled nearly 6 decades ago. In California's Central Valley, we are in our third consecutive critically dry year. We have had to issue a 0% allocation to irrigation water service contractors, and last Friday, we had to reduce water allocations to municipal and industrial contractors from 25% to minimum health and safety levels. These type of situations highlight the need for immediate actions, as well as thoughtful planning and on-the-ground work to make both our infrastructure and operational decisions more resilient to withstand future water resource scarcity and variability. Reclamation's budget priorities reflect a commitment to drought planning and response activities to promote water security. Appropriately, this budget request acknowledges the need to continue to develop and deploy science-based drought and climate change adaptation strategies. Reclamation's WaterSmart and science and technology programs directly contribute to these administration priorities. Reclamation must also plan for the future of its infrastructure. Reclamation's dams and reservoirs, water conveyance systems, and power generating facilities serve as a water and power infrastructure backbone of the American West. However, as with all infrastructure, these features are aging and are in need of critical maintenance. For example, in California, we're about to embark on our largest dam safety construction project ever, BF6 Dam. Our fiscal year 2023 dam safety request of $210 million not only addresses this project in California, but also projects in Wyoming, Oregon, New Mexico, Washington, and other locations. We're able to leverage this funding to address more West-wide needs in an accelerated manner due to the $500 million in bill funding and $100 million of which was allocated for BF6 Dam last fiscal year. However, it's not sufficient to address infrastructure needs without also considering economic inequities, the needs of underserved communities, and environmental justice. Reclamation is establishing and rebuilding water infrastructure for underserved populations by ensuring that clean drinking water is reliably provided to communities. Our budget includes funding for Reclamation's Native American Affairs program to enhance our technical assistance to tribes, and includes funding for Reclamation's Rural Water program. As with our dam safety program, our rural water program leverages $1 billion in bill funding to accelerate completion of these long-needed projects. The Bureau of Reclamation remains committed to working with Congress and our operating partners and stakeholders in carrying our mission and responsibly planning for the future. The challenge of drought and climate change demands such action, and the need for broader economic development and more equitable outcomes do as well. I again thank the subcommittee, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Deputy Commissioner Palumbo, 94% of California is now in severe drought or worse, as the most severe drought in the West is recorded in recorded history deepens. This is an emergency which many of us feel that really requires our action, and I believe we have secured $210 million in emergency funding last year. So here is the question: what actions are being taken now to address these issues as the drought continues to deepen?
Thank you very much, Chair. The Bureau of Reclamation is taking a variety of actions. In the state of California, we're using the funding of the $210 million provided, which we very much appreciate from this subcommittee, to deploy actions on the ground to address drought. For example, we're installing salinity barriers to deal with water inflow restrictions into the Delta. We're looking at fish hatchery operations, looking at laboratories for Delta smelt, installing curtains on Shasta Dam to control temperature. We're putting together a variety of drought mitigation activities and programs to deal with impacted farmers and communities throughout the West. That funding, the $210 million, plus additional funding from this subcommittee have come at the right time and are being deployed responsibly.
Well, I'm a bit confused. If I understand it correctly, the Congress passed a disaster supplemental in February of 2018 that included $15 billion in construction funding for critical flood and storm damage reduction projects. 4 years later, as I understand it, construction continues to stall due to core policy guidance requiring full funding up front. So, Assistant Secretary Connor, I appreciate your willingness to discuss this issue with me in the past, but I also appreciate the Corps' recent attention to fully resolving the long-standing obstacles in the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project. As directed in the fiscal year 2022 Energy and Water Report language, will you commit to revise the core policy guidance so these projects can continue to move ahead?
Chair Feinstein, I commit to working with you and your staff on exercising any and all discretion I have to move those projects and work with General Spellman to move those projects forward as quickly as possible. We may have some legal authority issues that we have to raise with you and your team, and we're working through that right now. We've had some good discussions lately. Our goal is to ensure that all the projects in BBA 2018 are moving forward, and we've got good construction on some activity, and we've got some projects, particularly South San Francisco, held up. But I'm committed to working with you and your team on moving those projects forward.
Thank you. Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to take a little different approach today, gentlemen. I'm going to ask you a few quick questions. Feel free to give me a yes or no. There's a method here to my madness. Like everybody else in the Western Hemisphere and a few in the Eastern, I have some specific projects I'd like to talk to you about, but I'm not going to talk to you about them today. I want to talk about a larger issue, and that has to do with the integrity of the Corps and some of this loose talk about earmarks. So let me ask you a couple of questions. With the exception of a really small number of projects, less than 1%, is it not true that Congress doesn't authorize construction of proposed Corps projects without a comprehensive study that can take up to years to complete to determine if the project's economically justified? Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
that study's also got to show that the project's environmentally sound, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Technically feasible, is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
So somebody just can't call you folks up and at the Corps and say, I've got a project and I want it done, and you better get it done. It doesn't work that way, does it?
That's correct, Senator. It does not.
All right. In your years at the Corps, what percentage of all Corps projects have been authorized for by Congress for construction without meeting this three-part test?
Sir, I've been with the Corps 6.5 years. I'm not aware of any.
Any. Every project has had to be economically justified, environmentally sound, and technically feasible, based on an objective study,
Senator, that's correct.
not by politicians.
That's correct.
All right? What's a favorable chief's report mean?
Sir, it means that the project, as you said, is technically feasible, it's economically justified, and it will achieve its desired effect in one of our core mission areas.
Okay. And in your years with the Corps, what's your best estimate of all the construction authorizations that have been enacted without a favorable chief's report?
Sir, I'm not aware of any that have been authorized without a favorable report.
Okay. And not to put too fine a point on it, but one of the things that the Corps looks at in this study, which can take years, is whether the taxpayers are getting a return on their investment. In other words, the benefits have to substantially outweigh the costs. Is that right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, earlier I talked about HISTRIS and the levee protection system in southeast Louisiana, which protects Louisiana from the south. But like a lot of states, we're not only endangered by the south, water from the south, we're endangered by water from the north. Louisiana, you can see from the map, drains 41% of the continental United States and parts of two Canadian provinces. So we have a threat from the north, from water. The Great Flood of 1927, we remember it. I don't remember how many tens of thousands of acres flooded. Millions dollars worth of damage. This is 1927 now. As usual, America turned to the Corps of Engineers. And we said, help us fix it. And you did. And you built levees from just south of the Canadian border all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Cost $13 billion. Man, that was a lot of money then. It saved this country trillions of dollars. And the point I'm trying to make, look, earmarks are now back. And I'm not making a critical or laudable statement about them. It's up to the senator whether they want to do earmarks. But I don't want there to be any confusion. I don't know the technical definition of an earmark. I don't know how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin either. But I don't want these core projects to be considered earmarks. This isn't politics. These projects have to be studied. They have to have a substantial return on an investment. And I want this country to know that and be proud of that. And I don't want, as we have this discussion about earmarks, the sterling reputation of the Corps of Engineers to be tarnished. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hyder?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, first, I want to ask unanimous consent to enter an article into the record. This is from E&E Daily, and the headline is, Army Corps cuts would put boating, camping sites at risk. White House fiscal 2023 budget would cut more than $50 million from Army Corps recreation spending. Without I just ask unanimous consent to put that in the record. Assistant Secretary Connor, I bring this up because In the last 2 years, we've seen this incredible surge in visitation to public lands writ large, everything from Army Corps to Forest Service to our national parks. Army Corps actually experienced an additional 20 million visits just last year. So I just want to ask, are these cuts a good idea? It seems to be a particularly unfortunate time to do that.
Senator Heinrich, thank you for raising the issue. I think myself and General Spellman, we've had discussions about that. We certainly understand the value, increasing value of recreation, as you point out. So we've got some work to do with this budget. We're trying to fit in a lot of priorities, but we need to go through and analyze the full range of impacts with respect to potential, reduction of services to the general public, and we don't want that. So with that budget, we're going to try and manage it so that we don't have those impacts. The good news is through IIJ, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and other mechanisms, we've made some investments in the maintenance of facilities, but we need to operate those facilities. And so we're going to look at the 22 spend plan. We're going to look at other ways that we can ensure we're not reducing services. But it's a concern, and I appreciate you raising it.
No, I look forward to working with you on this issue. I think, if anything, we've really seen this as a part of our economy that has grown dramatically as a result of people's desire to be outside in the midst of COVID. I think that's going to carry forward for a number of years, and we certainly want to keep those facilities open. Mr. Palumbo, historical and projected climate changes have translated to pretty significant water supply reductions and habitat degradation in the Rio Grande Basin. Warmer conditions, decreased runoff into the Rio Grande, resulting, frankly, in a drier river every single year. The existing low-flow conveyance channel that runs alongside the Rio between San Acacia, New Mexico, and Elephant Butte Reservoir has been identified as a key source of water inefficiency in the Middle Rio Grande. What can we do about addressing existing river inefficiencies, such as the low-flow conveyance channel, so that we can keep more water in the main stem and protect the habitats that rely on that water?
Thank you very much, Senator, for bringing up this issue. This is an important issue for the Bureau of Reclamation. We're currently implementing several projects with the low-flow conveyance channel to remove sediment, remove plugs, improve connectivity to the Rio Grande at large. So we are focusing on this. It is important, and we have folks doing work on the ground in this area.
So it didn't take long for that entire conveyance channel to sediment up. Should we be looking at whether it was a good idea in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. The Bureau of Reclamation prides itself on adaptive management. If something doesn't work, let's not do it again. Let's figure out a way to do it better. That is also part of this program, to ensure that there's other ways in which to provide the habitat, provide the flows, and get them in the right areas at the right time.
Assistant Secretary Connor, in the face of continued aridification of the West, and I use that word rather than drought because it's now a permanent dynamic, how can we better manage the Rio Grande as an interconnected system rather than a series of separate reservoirs, each with separate purposes?
It's a great question. It's the question du jour of the day because we've got to holistically use all of our infrastructure, the Bureau of Reclamation's facility, particularly in the Rio Grande Basin, the facilities that we have under the Corps of Engineers control, ABAQ, use that in tandem with Elvado and ensure that we can add to water supply. You help put that provision in place through the last WRDA that we can expand the use of ABAQ, and that's a necessary part of the process. We've got to look also how we do flood risk reduction and how we make releases and see if we can't coordinate with the water suppliers so that our releases aren't solely focused on flood control, that we do our job, but we operate in a way that we can help maximize water supply for other entities. And that means not just coordinating with the Bureau, but Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, with tribes. There is a lot to do. There's a lot of capability, and it requires even better coordination than in the past.
I'm out of time, but would the Corps and BOR be willing to work with the National Academy of Sciences to study the Upper Rio Grande as a whole and come up with some management practices to keep the river wet?
Yes, we had a discussion with NAS just this week.
Thank you, Chairwoman Feinstein and Ranking Member Kennedy, and I certainly want to thank our witnesses today. We truly appreciate you being here, and as we discuss the 2023 budget for the Corps and the Bureau of Reclamation. Secretary Connor, I just really appreciate the time that you spent in traveling to Vicksburg, Mississippi in February for a briefing on the Yazoo area pump project. That is a really important project to me. It is one of my very top priorities because I have seen the suffering that has happened in Mississippi. But today I'd like to discuss environmental justice, a topic this administration says is a top priority as well. As you know, the Comprehensive Yazoo Backwater Area Project is a congressionally authorized Corps project designed to provide flood protection to thousands of residents in the South Mississippi Delta, most of whom are African Americans. I have visited this place many, many times, and I don't live far from it. The Yazoo Backwater Area comprises of 1,446 square miles, 6 Mississippi counties. These are some of the most rural, underserved counties in the entire United States. This project consists of 3 components designed to be used in tandem, including levees to keep Mississippi and Yazoo River floodwaters out, floodgates to let accumulated interior floodwater out, and pumping stations to remove floodwaters trapped on the protected side of the levee system when the floodgates have to be closed because the Mississippi River is high and excess rainfall occurs. All of these features have been completed except for the pumps. Unfortunately, the EPA in 2008 stopped the Corps from completing the pumps, the project's last remaining feature. Since that EPA veto in 2008, the area has experienced catastrophic flooding nearly every year, causing billions with a B in damages and destroying lives, home, property, wildlife, habitat, and the environment. In 2019, the Yazoo Backwater Area, which is more than 11 times the size of Washington, D.C., remained flooded for well over 6 months. It was underwater. It was disastrous on the quality of life for the people who live and work there, many who are already impoverished. 2 people lost their lives. During the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, there was another terrible flood. It again displaced residents and forced them into crowded shelters or to move in with family, neither option ideal during an unprecedented pandemic. Recognizing that this perpetual flooding was simply not sustainable for the people or the environment, and armed with the new scientific information, the Corps issued a new proposed plan for the pumps in December of 2020. Unfortunately, the EPA last November put the brakes on the Corps from moving forward yet again. It simply dismissed years of new Corps environmental studies and thousands of pages of scientific information that fully justifies the pumps. We often hear we need to listen to the science. Well, what does the science say? The science says the Corps' new proposed plan would not convert any wetlands to non-wetlands. The science says the project would benefit all sections of the economy and contribute to the well-being of all area residents. The science says the project would benefit wetlands, aquatic species, wildlife and wildlife habitat, and every important resource that flooding has been destroying for decades. But here's the real irony. The current administration has placed environmental justice at the top of its priority list. The Yazoo Backwater Area population is nearly 70% minority, with roughly 30% living in poverty. The Corps' Environmental Justice Appendix indicates that the pumps would significantly benefit low-income and minority populations, and it shows that more than 90% of the homes would be devastated from a 100-year flood event or minority occupied. Secretary Connor, please, there's two things, and I want you to thoroughly answer both of these for me, if you would. Please share your thoughts on the environmental justice benefits associated with the Yazoo Backwater Project, and do you consider the Corps' new proposed plan to be consistent with this administration's emphasis on promoting environmental justice?
Senator Hyde-Smith, I wish I would have started with your statement when I got into Yazoo, because it took me a while to get up to speed the way you just articulated it. It's a very complex system. I'll get exactly to your points, because I don't think it's ironic that this administration focuses on environmental justice and how we've dealt with the Yazoo Basin, or how we're going to deal. Let me put it that way, because yes, we cannot move forward with the project that the Corps most recently proposed because of the reinstitution of the veto. That is correct, and that's concerning, because we've got to get to some project to address the uncompleted project, as you mentioned. And we are getting the attention that we need at a very high level to move forward. A interagency group chaired by CEQ Chair Brenda Mallory. She's convened us together, and when I went down to Yazoo in February, it was with Chair Mallory to get a firsthand account, and you cannot understand this system without that firsthand account, and because of the complexity of it. So we need to address the intended project as it was originally conceived, and you're right, it's missing that last phase of the project. So we've got to deal with that backwater flooding. We've got to figure out the mix of structural and non-structural. And when I say structural, I think pumps are still in the mix for the discussion that we're going to have in this interagency group. There is questions about the science from some of the other agencies. The Corps feels very strongly that it's got peer-reviewed science, but we need to have that dialogue about what exactly are the impacts to wetlands. Are we reducing the wetland function? Those are going to be some detailed conversations, but I can assure you this is part of the environmental justice agenda to get to a project, to get to a solution, because of the factors that you mentioned with respect to minority residents in that area, as well as the poverty level that exists in that area. So that's why it's getting this attention. And I just want to note, I appreciate the fact, being part of this group, that there is a sense of urgency that we need to get to a reconfigured project. And so I share your views, the importance, and I will keep you posted as that interagency group continues to work on that reconfigured project.
Please do so. And General Spellman, give me your knowledge of civil engineering. Please share your thoughts on how practical, if even possible, it would be to provide meaningful flood protection in the Yazoo Backwater area without a pumping station. How would that be possible?
So, Senator, as you know, this pump station was part of the project since it was initially authorized in the 1941 Flood Control Act. We've looked at 34 options to how to evacuate water from that basin, and our recommendation, we're certainly open to any other ideas that may be out there. But we're confident in our science, we're confident in our engineering that the pump station can be operated in a manner that protects these communities that you mentioned, but also protects the 38,000 acres of wetland that are in that area. So we're confident of that. The other 34 options, we looked at everything from looking at ring levees around every home. We just could not economically justify that. We've looked at elevating homes. We looked at buyouts. We looked at elevating roads. And again, not all of that, after we got through that analysis, was consistent with our longstanding environmental operating principles. And some of it, frankly, we just could not get to economic justification. We stand by our recommendation, but again, we're open to any other ideas that may be out there.
I appreciate your answer very much, both of you, and I know I'm over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to each of our panelists for the work that you do and for being here today. I want to especially thank the Army Corps. In the last 6 years or so, we have had two of our ports dredged in New Hampshire. And right now, the Turning Basin in the Piscataqua River is being dredged. And for a state with only 18 miles of coastline, that's pretty good. And I really appreciate that effort. But because of the challenges we had trying to get in the queue to get those projects done, I recognize just how challenging the funding is for the work that you're doing, and was very pleased to see that the Army Corps received $9 billion from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and of that, the Corps has already announced $4 million in projects in New Hampshire for 22 and 23, fiscal years 22 and 23, which has been really important. But it raises a couple of questions that I hear from people about how project selection is doing. How are those projects determined? And so can you speak to the type of projects that you're looking at as you're looking at this funding?
Yes, ma'am, I'll start. When I formulate my recommendations, when I take them to the Secretary, I look at 5 criteria. To the top of that list is always life safety. So, for example, a dam safety project that we know that has a population at risk downstream, those always go to the top of the list. Second priority, I have legal mandates across the country. Some of that Endangered Species Act, for example. Some of our projects have a national security component to them. I would use the example of the Sioux Lock and the steel industry. We've made that argument before. And then finally, number 4 is economic and environmental returns. I think there's a narrative, an incorrect narrative that the Corps only looks at benefit to cost ratios. That's not the case. That is part of the justification. And then finally, maybe most importantly, we want to finish what we start. If we have a project that's under construction, we never want to demobilize a contractor because of lack of funding. We want to make sure we can keep our contractors at work and finish work that we have initiated.
Thank you. I certainly share that, and I think that's really helpful to know. One of the things both you and Mr. Palumbo talked about in your opening testimony was the importance of science and research and development in determining how to respond to particular areas. And I was really dismayed to see that the President's budget reduces the Coastal Inlets Research Program from over $12 million in fiscal year 22 to only $100,000. And I wonder if you could speak to why that is, and how can we do what we need to do if we're not able to have the research to allow us to address climate change and the other critical projects we have.
Senator, I know the Secretary shares the same. We are absolutely committed to elevating our investment in research and development. And I think folks like me have to do a better job of communicating the importance of in research and development. Today, in the Civil Works program, we invest about 0.2% of our overall program into R&D, where folks like Apple are investing 4.5%, or my counterparts in the Netherlands, the Rijkswaterstaat, are investing 4%. In fact, I have all of many of my senior leaders down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, this week, going through our top 10 research and development priorities, and we're framing up the argument and what we would like to include in the 24 budget for these top 10 initiatives in the Civil Works program. So we want to get more aggressive on that front.
Good, I really
Senator,
appreciate that. Yes,
can I just
please.
add real quick that General Spellman will have a very strong partner in this effort. We are completely in sync with the importance of R&D and how we want to put it out in the 24 budget.
That's great. And, you know, listening to everybody raise the concerns about the projects that we have in our home states and the challenges that we face with climate change, it seems to me that as we did in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and we looked at projects like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the effort to electrify the country, and all of the projects the Army Corps was involved in doing that, that this may be another time when we need to really relook at the kind of regulations that you're talking about with respect to your Yazoo River project, the kind of things that were done with respect to the project in New Orleans, where we know we've got all this water draining in, we've got a drought in the west, and yet this water's flowing into the Gulf and we're not able to divert it to places that we need. It seems to me that we're in a position where we need to totally re-examine some of the assumptions that we've made for the last 3 or 4 decades and think about how we better position ourselves to address the challenges of the 21st century. And I think that requires the kind of overhaul you're talking about, General, as you think about research. What else do we need to do in terms of regulation and other areas to address the challenges that we face? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Murkowski?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Senator Shaheen, know that I agree with what you have just concluded there. In many parts of Alaska, particularly on our coast, we're seeing levels of erosion that are threatening communities. Those communities don't have a lot of alternatives. There's no road out, and they're kind of very, very isolated. So we've got a list of those threatened communities that we know need to be relocated. We're in the process of relocating one out of dozens. And yet we know that every year there are more communities that are further threatened. And now it's not just looking at the coastal communities, it's the river communities where we're seeing river erosion at pretty remarkable rates there. So know that I would join you in that. Secretary Connor, thank you for working with us. General Spellman, thank you as well for all that the Corps has done in trying to address many of the backlog projects that we've seen in my state. I think we made some good progress with the infrastructure bill. I had a chance yesterday to meet with Colonel De La Rosa to talk about the Alaska-specific projects. I can tell you right now, there is an urgency from the communities, whether it be the community of Nome, up in the interior, the Moose Creek project, specifically the Lowell Point. That's truly a safety issue for that community. And so they're wondering how quickly they can expect to see the funding move out. We got a little bit of a top line on that yesterday, but I guess what I would like to hear you say this morning is that there is a level of priority with these projects, again, that have been on the list for a long, long time, and we're finally starting to see going. Secretary Connor?
The Corps very effectively got the guidance document for the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the disaster supplemental to my office this week. So we will process and get it out by the end of next week.
Okay, good. Well, we'll be working closely with you just so we can give good guidance to people on the ground in terms of what to expect. I want to ask you about the Port of Alaska in Anchorage. As you know, pretty significant port there. Handles 1/2 of all Alaska inbound fuel and freight. It's distributed statewide, consumed by 90% of Alaska's population. Everything funnels into this port. It supports more than $14 billion in commercial activity in our state. It's the main inbound containerized freight and fuel distribution center. It additionally is the strategic seaport that supports DOD missions in Alaska, the Pacific, and the Arctic. This port is absolutely critical to Alaska, to the country, really. And the problem that we're facing is that it is in severe disrepair. So I know that this has been brought to your attention, but I've had no fewer than a half dozen meetings in the past couple weeks just on this particular project. So I would ask for a commitment to work with us to get the New Start funding in 2023 if we can, but just need to know that this is on your radar here.
Senator, it's definitely on my radar. I know as part of the modernization effort, there's a range of permitting as well as some infrastructure needs. So I think, quite frankly, and General Spellman may have more knowledge, but I'm a little unclear about the infrastructure investments needed to be made. So need to get up to speed with respect to that and the authorizations presently available, but absolutely get the need for coordinated permitting to take those actions and move them forward as quickly as possible. General?
Senator, I've been to the port. I'd certainly acknowledge all of your comments. We recognize its importance, and we're committed to do our regulatory work or other work, and we will continue to work to make our best technical argument for the New START authority.
Good. Well, we know, again, that this is not just a local priority, it's truly a statewide priority. Last question, and this relates to some of our small harbors. And I appreciate what you've said in terms of your analysis and the review, General, in terms of how you determine priorities for projects. But I've always been concerned that our smaller ports, our smaller harbors get kind of overlooked. And we've had this conversation in the past. That's why we have our small and subsistence harbors category. But you know, when you think about cost benefit, any economic analysis is going to show that large ports are favored because they have big economic impacts. And so everything that we can do to find a way to help the small communities, for these coastal communities, that port, that harbor, that is their economy. That will allow for them to really exist. So I'm looking at Craig, which I was really disappointed didn't make the list, and I would like to understand why, but also Dutch Harbor. For communities like Craig, communities like Dutch, if the barge doesn't make it in with the groceries, it's not like you can just drive somewhere else to go get the materials that you need. These communities need their harbors. There's no other option. So I guess I'd like a quick understanding as to how and why communities like Craig and Dutch Harbor didn't make that list, and whether what we need to do to ensure that that, for instance, Craig gets the $30 million for pre-construction engineering and design. How do we help these communities?
So Senator, I'll start. First, I would tell you that I'm responsible across the nation for maintaining 577 federal navigation channels, and so we recognize there are many of those channels that don't get touched on a routine basis. I acknowledge your comments about Craig Harbor and Dutch Harbor. I hope I'm wrong. In the Jobs Act, we're seeing nearly a $1 billion investment in Alaska, and we're working down the priorities we think that you shared with us, and you mentioned it. It's Nome, it's Barrow, it's Kenai, it's Moose Creek, it's Low Creek. Again, I hope I'm wrong. I think we are really going to stress our contracting partners in the state of Alaska. And when I took these recommendations to the Secretary, I've got 963 construction projects underway today in the Civil Works program. I did not want to put us in a position where we were going to have money sitting in a bank where we couldn't get after the work. So as I made these recommendations, we wanted to give the Secretary projects that we knew we could get after right away. We are not forgetting about the projects that you mentioned, Craig and Dutch. We're going to get after these. It might just be in a next year's appropriation that we can make that argument.
Okay, I'm hearing next year's appropriations, okay.
Can I just quickly add,
Connor.
a lot of discussion about Craig and Dutch Harbor as part of the allocation process, and I think we've got an issue that we need to discuss with you with respect to the $250 million limit that was in IIJA for small ports, and of course we allocated that to Port of Ohm, which is also a very important port, so we got to work through that issue, but they definitely are on the radar screen. And I wanted to just get quickly, because I absolutely agree with your assessment that we need to look at a wider range of benefits. And my predecessor, Mr. James, issued a comprehensive benefits memo. I want to build upon that. I think that was a very good piece of work. We want to give that guidance to the Corps to look at a wider array of benefits, including regional benefits, which are very important. And then we want to institutionalize not just looking at those benefits, but being able to make decisions based on that wider view of the benefits. And we've got a directive to move forward with the rulemaking on principal requirements and guidelines, our agency-specific procedures that will allow us to make decisions on a broader basis. That's a high priority as part of our agenda.
Great, that's really good to hear. I appreciate that, because I think we recognize, again, it's not just the number of individuals served, but truly a much wider range of benefit that can accrue to a region. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I apologize for going over my time.
And thank you, Senator. I have a bit of a beef, and so I'm going to raise it now. Assistant Secretary Connor, over the last 2 years, we have provided $82 million for the Army Corps WIFIA program to provide low-interest loans for local dam safety projects. The implementation for this program has been stalled. We have been clear, and I think to ignore congressional intent in this manner regarding how taxpayer dollars shall be spent is really not acceptable. My state, California, has 89 dams which are in less than satisfactory condition and would cause loss of life or significant economic damage if they were to fail. Dam safety has been a priority for mine as an appropriator since I've come to the Senate, and it's critical to millions of Americans who live near these dams. When will you finalize? Apparently, we have $14 million a year and a half ago there. So the question is, when will you finalize the program rules and get out these funds so we can start repairing dangerously deficient non-federal dams?
Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership in this area. It's a legitimate beef that you have. Absolutely. So we have a proposed rulemaking that we are in the final throes. I expect that within the next month or so, hopefully no more than 6 weeks, we will be in the Federal Register with that proposed rulemaking, which is the first step to setting up the program. The WIFIA program and enlisting the ability for private dam owners to repair and modify their dams, it's part of the resilience agenda that we need in this era of climate change. So it's another important tool. We're moving forward. And lastly, I would just note, we've lit a fire under ourselves because WIFIA is now in the President's budget for 2023. So we acknowledge the importance of the program. We've got to move forward and get it stood up to address all the reasons you just mentioned.
So I want to understand this. I have your word here that it's going to move.
You have my word. I'm going to do everything possible to move it through and get it in the Federal Register in the next 1 to 2 months.
Well, I accept that with thanks, so thank you. Senator Kennedy, you're next.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out that Senator Hoeven just called me. He is on his way. I'd like to, if we could indulge him for a few minutes, because I know John has some questions he wants to ask. I wanted to ask one of my colleagues a question. Senator Hyde-Smith, I listened with interest about your situation in Mississippi. As I appreciate it, the Corps wants to go forward and the EPA won't.
Pretty much correct that that's what has happened. The EPA is the one that put the brakes on, and we had signed the MOUs. We had done everything, and the science was very, very strong. And the amazing thing is the two different sets of scientists with EPA and with the Corps have not sat down. And I think that is critical. Am I correct, Daniel? They have not sat down together, and I don't know why that has not happened. But I really, really would like to see that happen. And thank you for the discussion, because literally a lady who was pregnant died because of this flooding. And, you know, we talk about wetlands, we talk about everything else. 6 months, these houses were underwater, this property was underwater, 6 months. And, you know, I talked to so many people who were living in hotel rooms, who were living with relatives in the back of businesses that people allowed them to leave. These people cannot afford hotel rooms and other areas like that.
Well, can I ask, why haven't the two sets of scientists talked? Or they have these things called telephones at a minimum.
Sir, so our team from Vicksburg and the scientists have sat down and compared data. What may be happening is...
with EPA and with the Corps,
yes,
the two sets?
Yes, ma'am. What may be happening is new staff that have come in within the past several months of the past year, but we will pack up this afternoon to go meet...
Directly into the mic. It's hard to
Yes, ma'am. So my parting comment is we will pack up this afternoon and meet with any scientist from any federal agency or state agency that would like to compare notes on our data.
Yeah, the Corps is very willing. EPA is the one that we can't get to seem to get as interested as.
Senator, can I just add very quickly?
Yeah, but let me put a finer point on it. Here's what I'm missing. The Corps spent a lot of time and money doing this project, did its studies, decided there's no damage, no damage to wetlands. The leadership at EPA changed. One of the leadership's priorities is environmental justice, and the EPA is saying, in the name of environmental justice, we're going to hold up on this project, even though this project will help people who happen to be 70% African Americans. Am I missing something here?
I would just add, I don't speak for EPA, but I have spoken to Administrator Regan and Assistant Administrator Fox. They are strongly committed to getting their team with our team as part of this interagency group. I think the administrator was particularly moved by his visit down to the Yazoo Basin, so frustrating, yes, but we're going to get together.
When's your administrator going to make a decision?
Well, we've got to get the teams together and not just have them meet and explain the differences. We as leaders have to reconcile those differences so we can make a decision about the project that can move forward.
Well, how about next week?
We're getting together our interagency group tomorrow at the leadership level and having yet another meeting. And the goal is to then focus the issues so that we can get our teams to get into those details,
right,
so we can
recommend. I'm just trying to get a timeline. The Corps spent a lot of time and money. It says we're ready to go. It's passed all the studies. The scientists say go. Y'all have because of the change in leadership, have said, nope, we're holding up. And we got to make a decision. When? I'm just asking a simple question. When are you going to make a decision?
As soon as we can.
I don't.
That's hopefully we're going to be working on this all year.
It's going to take a year?
Well, it's going to take some time to reconcile the differences between the agencies.
Why?
Because there are disagreements about the science. We as leaders can convene folks, we can focus the issues, but we've got to have that dialogue, and that's going to take a little bit of a time.
I don't understand why. I don't get it. I don't understand why you can't put the two scientists together, lock them in a room, give them some coffee, give them a few honey buns, and say, okay, here over the next 8 hours, work this out. I don't get it. That's the way the real world works. Why can't you do that?
Well, we are going to do that. Whether
When?
the 8 hours is what it's going to take, or whether it's going to take 24 or 48 of intense dialogue, I don't know the answer to the question. I just know that we're committed to forcing that process to happen and coming up with a project.
You understand why people get frustrated with
Absolutely.
government? Okay? I'm just asking for a decision. I'm not telling you what decision to make. I just don't see why you can't do it within 6 weeks.
I understand the frustration. I'm part of a committed team that's going to get to a decision, Senator.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again for all your good work, gentlemen and ladies.
And 6 weeks would be great.
Okay. Senator Hyde-Smith?
Sure. Hey, you are my honey bun. Shifting gears from flood control to innovation, Congress is asking the Corps to do a lot of things with the record high funding the Corps has received in recent years. I want to make sure you have the tools you'll need to be successful. Part of what you'll need is innovation, and to be able to access the innovation taking place in the private sector. Sometimes the rigid structure of the federal acquisition process doesn't make that very easy for you. To address that very problem, Congress gave NASA, DOD, and a number of other agencies, other transaction authority, OTA, has been used to great effects by the Department of Defense, including the Corps of Engineers, to access innovative solutions and cutting-edge technologies from entities that aren't traditional federal contractors. Unfortunately, the Department of Defense reads the law as providing OTA only for the Corps' military mission, not the Civil Works mission. Given all that we're asking you to do, you need these important tools, would be what most people would conclude. But Secretary Connor and General Spellman, don't you think having the ability to use other transaction authority in your Civil Works mission would be a useful tool for you to have?
Senator, we do. As you suggested, we've used this on several projects in our military construction program, and I would argue to great effect. And we also think there's value in bringing this over to the Civil Works program. I have just not had the opportunity yet to sit down with Mr. Connor to talk about this particular tool, but you have our commitment. We'll have that conversation, ma'am.
And as Congress works on the next Water Resources Development Act, will you work with me to help put that tool in your hands?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to bring up a subject that is of real concern to me. The Bureau and several states have already severely reduced water allocations, in many cases to zero. And I'm a Westerner, and I'm from a big state. It's 40 million people. It's a huge commercial state. It's a big ag state. But there's no way the West can survive extreme droughts plus climate change without more investment in infrastructure to move water from the wet years to the dry ones. WIN Act funding, I think, and I wrote the bill, is key to developing long-term solutions to these challenges. And last year, we provided an additional $155 million to WIN Act funding for water storage, desal, and water recycling and reuse projects. So I've continued to work with my colleagues to appropriate funding for good projects. But the President's budget recommends no funding for any of these projects. And I'm curious as to why.
Senator, thank you very much for that question. The way the Bureau of Reclamation is looking at the WIN Act projects, we were able to make a lot of progress on getting projects determined feasible, getting projects started with funding, and we're now utilizing the bill funding, the bipartisan infrastructure law funding in large storage to put towards some of those WIN projects. We're going to be making an announcement in later this fiscal year in 22, using that bill funding to advance those WIN-related projects. And we also have queued up money for 23 out of bill funding for those WIN Act projects. So we absolutely thank the subcommittee on supporting those projects, getting them moving, and we're going to keep them moving because the WIN Act authority expired, but we're going to keep them moving with bill funding.
Well, thank you very much for that. We will follow closely and see if it happens. Please know that this is a big problem out west. And one of the things that I've seen is how big this country is when you fly back and forth over it. And I'm really concerned. So this is a top priority for me, and I believe for California. So I thank you for that answer. And my expectation will be that the administration will respond. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Can I say one more
Please,
thing,
go ahead.
Madam Chair? First, I want to just repeat what I've said before, what a delight it is to work with you, Madam Chair, and your very able staff. I just want to, I'm going to be calling you gentlemen. I need to get updates on 3 projects that I know you're working on that are really important in my state, have become more important recently. The Calcasieu River and Pass, you know, we need some dredging done there. It's a major LNG export hub. And we need to get it to 42 feet deep and about 800 feet wide. Our Chaffalaya, I know you know the projects I'm talking about, our Chaffalaya River dredging. We've got to maintain the authorized depth of 20 feet deep and a bottom width of 400 feet. And finally, last but certainly not least, I don't mention these in any particular order, our New Orleans to Venice Hurricane Protection Project. So I'll just be calling you to try to get an update. And again, I wanted to thank you for giving so much to our country.
That was nice. Very nice, Senator. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome, Senator.